Hello, hello, and welcome into this week's episode of Coast to Coast. I'm Calvin Wetzel. No Karina Mustafa this week. Load management week for her, much deserved. So we are handing over the reins to a very good friend of ours, Jim Turvey of Action Network, one of my favorite friends, people, and WNBA analysts out there. Jim, I'm excited to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. This is awesome to be on because I feel like I'm always messaging you guys. Like, I'm definitely a huge fan, like, kind of geek out on the show. So being on the flip side of it, I mean, you and I are in conversation very often, anyways, and potting very often. But to come on Coast to Coast is awesome. Definitely, absolutely love the show and excited to chat. We always chat WNBA. We always talk about like betting and stuff, but this is more like big picture, really just kind of fun conversation stuff that I think we've got some good topics to go through today.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it because on those topics, we are going to dive into the awards. Even though it's June, we haven't even reached the Olympic break yet. So all of this is going to change, and we're going to be wrong on everything because that's how this stuff works. If you try to predict the end of the season, who knows? But we're going to do it anyway because it's fun and because there are so many good conversations to be had about so many of these awards. So we got to start at the top, obviously, with MVP. Every time come on a pod and talk about MVP and talk about Asia, who of course we're going to talk about. I have to wear the shirt that we always have to shout out Dana Mataya for the Aces baseball jersey from Asia. This is probably like the fourth time I've worn this on a pod, so it's my
It's a
go-to. But
sweet look. Yeah.
it is. I love it. It's one of my favorite items in my wardrobe, to be honest. And so let's get into it. Let's get into Asia. Let's start with Asia because to me the interesting thing about the MVP award is that Asia is clearly far and away, and I want to get your thoughts on this, the best player in the league and having the best season in the league individually, and one of the best seasons to this point that we've ever seen. But her team is 500. Of course, that may change when Chelsea Gray comes back, but you almost never see an MVP on a 500 team or even a team that doesn't finish in the top two, even if they work their way up to third or fourth. And you have some other good candidates here with AT on the Sun, Nafisa Collier on the Lynx. I know we started to get the Jonquel Jones hype train running a little bit the other day after what she did, dropping over 30 in Las Vegas. So with this landscape, with the best player not being on what is currently the best team, although who knows whether they will be by the end of the season, where are you at with MVP? Who would you have as your front runner right now, and how do you think this landscape is going to sort of unfold as the season goes on?
So I would have Asia as my number one, and I'd have Asia number one by like a decent margin. Now it does seem crazy. You mentioned some of the, it very often does go on a top team. This is not a top team. This is a 500 team right now. But yeah, and to that point, so I have some numbers here. So every MVP has come from a top three seed since 2008, and all but one of those was a top two seed, and six of the last seven have been the top overall seed. So it really would be bucking some historical trends. But on the flip side of that, what we're seeing from Asia is bucking all sorts of historical trends anyway. So I'm gonna go even more numbers heavy on here. This is her hoop stats. We gotta get into these numbers here.
That's right. That's
So
right.
she is currently tracking to break the all-time points per game record. That one y'all probably know. She's averaging 28 points a game. Maybe you don't know how big the gap though is. The second highest, or like the current full season record, is 25.3 from Diana Taurasi in 2006. Couple little fun nuggets here. Arike is actually tracking for third all time right now, and Jewel Lloyd last season is the second best full season points per game total. So I just want to say we're in an awesome, fun era of the W, and we're seeing records fall left and right. But that is not to take away from what Asia's doing, because these numbers are just astronomical. She's on pace for the seventh best rebounding all season. And, we can talk about Chelsea Gray coming back. That's probably part of this conversation. That might cut into her points per game a little bit. I don't think it's going to cut into her rebounding, to be honest. It's also tracking for the highest PER of all time. So this would be 36.4 PER right now. That would top Lauren Jackson in 2007 at 35. By the way, Asia last season was third all time, also notably higher than Stewie, which, if we want to talk about, having a little bit of that snub, like the voters are going to be like, oh, we kind of did Asia wrong last season.
Especially
Again,
whoever voted for her fourth.
Yeah. That fourth place vote looking a little more sketchy day by day. Here's the one though that absolutely breaks my brain. So win shares is definitely not a perfect stat. It can overvalue team performance at time. It can miss things here and there. But it's a pretty good stat. She's tracking for 11 win shares right now, which would break the all-time record that she set last season. That could make sense. You're like, oh yeah, it's a it's a usage stat. She's having a great start season. But where this is breaking my brain is win shares. Part of why I don't love it always is that it ties to team win loss kind of heavier than all the other stats. So she has a 3.3 win shares out of her team's 6 wins. And this is not like some scrub team. This is the Aces. They still have Jackie Young and Kelsey Plum. And this stat thinks that over half of their wins have been driven by A'ja Wilson. So the season she is having, it really can't be overstated how incredibly well she is playing right now. She's got she's got the snub from last year. She's got Chelsea Gray coming back. What'll be interesting to see is, how much does that eat into her usage? To me, it's like she put the stats up the first half of the season. They're going to put the wins up the second half of the season. I don't know if they get to a top 2 seed. Maybe they settle around 3 or 4. I think that's going to be enough when you add her insane numbers. The fact that she clearly is the best player in the league. I don't think there's any debate of it anymore. And so when you get all of that on your side, for me, it's A'ja Wilson far and away. But is there any debate for anyone else for you?
Well, right now, no. I think what I'm interested in is because right now, I think part of the conversation is that Chelsea Gray is going to come back and this team is not going to finish 500. They might not finish with the 1 seed like they did last year, but they are almost certainly going to finish above 500. But the question becomes, how high do they have to finish? Because if for some reason they were to finish 500, that would be a lot different than being 500 right now in the middle of June. If you were 500
Yeah.
over 40 games, like I said, that's not going to happen. But how high do they have to get? If they get to 5th, is that high enough? Right now they're in 7th. If they get to 3rd, is that high enough? If they get to 2nd, that's pretty clearly high enough with her numbers, obviously. And you mentioned most of the MVPs have come from top 2 seeds. But how high do they have to get in the standings, and what does the record have to look like for her to win it? Because I think if you were at the end of the season and they were a 500 team in 7th place, it would be tough. As good as she is and as clearly the best player as she is, it would become a lot tougher. But to your point on the numbers, you didn't even mention some of the crazy numbers too, and we'll talk about her defense in a little bit. But 1.7 steals per game, 8th in the league, 2.5 blocks per game, 2nd in the league. And even aside from that, just eye test. If you watch her, she's everywhere on defense. She's impossible to score on. Her help defense, everything that you want in a defender on paper and on the court. And to me, something that I don't think it's talked about enough, honestly, with Brianna Stewart either, but for the purposes of this conversation, A'ja Wilson, she never, ever, ever turns it over. It is unreal how low her turnover rate consistently is. It is 6.6% right now. She turns it over under 7% of the time. That just doesn't happen. That doesn't
Especially
happen.
the usage rate that she has right now. It's over 30% usage. That is insane.
That doesn't even happen for really anyone. Like spot up shooters turn it over 7% of the time. And she's a high usage player who you would think maybe would turn it over once per game just on a charge or something. Right. And
defense is collapsing on her because of her incredible. Yeah, it's insane.
It's unreal. And I think that's part of the equation when people list off everything that she's good at and everything that she brings to the table and all the numbers that kind of gets lost too. And something that I want to make sure that doesn't get lost because it blows me away. And it's just part of how good and how all around she is and her impact. Like you said, the impact of maybe literally over half of this team's wins right now. So to me, it is A'ja. But I do think I would say that if she's going to finish as the MVP, they're probably going to need Chelsea Gray to come back fully healthy to the point where this team ends up finishing, I'll say, with at least mid-20s wins and at least in the top
15 was
4 or
the
5.
number that came to mind for me of like, I feel like that's a line of demarcation. If they get to 25 wins, I almost think that matters more than the seed. This is the top part of this league is really good this year. And you could see, the Lynx, Sun, Liberty, and Storm all finishing ahead of them, even if they get to 25 wins. But I think if they're the 5th seed and they're like 25 and 15 and they look better when Chelsea's back, even if, I don't know, Jackie Young misses a few games here and there, or Kelsey misses a few games, and they don't rack up enough wins to get into that top 4. I think the number she's putting up, I think it's going to be undeniable. Unless I do agree with you though. If say Chelsea suffers a setback or something, or someone else gets hurt and they do kind of stumble their way to like a 7 seed 20-20, that's going to be a tough case. Especially I feel like there's a name that you and I probably both have second on our ballots right now that she's putting up an incredible season too, and easily could give Asia a run for her money.
Yeah, so let's talk about, let's say hypothetically it were not to be Asia. Let's say it ends up going to someone else. Right now, you have a few really good candidates on teams that are at the top of the standings. We mentioned them off the top: Alyssa Thomas, Nafisa Collier, Jonquel Jones. I think you and I agree on this. Who would be your next in line on that list?
For me, it'd be Nafisa Collier. I know Alyssa Thomas, in hindsight, maybe Alyssa should have been the one to take the MVP last year, and she's doing great stuff, and the Sun are having a lot of success. To me, that what the Lynx have done against the schedule they have faced, they played the hardest schedule in the WNBA. The Sun are almost on the other side of that, having played one of the easiest schedules in the WNBA. When Nafisa Collier is doing, and we'll not to spoil a future award, but we'll be talking about this impact maybe a little bit more even later. But especially allowing them to play 5 out, she's collecting over 10 rebounds a game. As very undersized compared to some of the bigs in the W, but her rebounding ability and her defensive ability has really allowed them to play 5 out and kind of emulate to a degree what we saw when Becky came to the Aces and kind of brought that 5 out spacing with a talented modern big at the middle. They're kind of doing some of that in Minnesota, and they've just been so incredible so far. And I think Nafisa Collier for me is the one that would be second on my ballot, and maybe a hair above Alyssa Thomas, but I'm going with Collier if it's not Wilson right now.
Yeah, I am too, and that's the thing that I think makes this even a debate or a conversation at all, is the fact that while Asia is clearly the best player and putting up historic numbers, the teams that are currently at the top of the standings have some really, really good standout players in Nafisa being the one on the Lynx. And if these teams were all kind of getting it done in a much more balanced way where there was not one superstar shining, it might be easier to say let's give it to someone who's on the current 7 seed. But it does make it at least a little bit interesting when you have players like Alyssa Thomas and Nafisa Collier, and to some extent Jonquel Jones now too, hooping the way they are. But out of that group, I agree, I would take Nafisa Collier for what she's done on both ends, like you said, which we are going to get into in a little bit. So let's go ahead and move on to some of those awards. We're going to dangle that one. We're not going to get to that one next, but we'll come to it. Rookie of the Year. This one is slightly more interesting than maybe a lot of people thought it would be too. I do think we still have a clear favorite, which like we do for MVP, but it's another one that's at least worth talking about because I don't think it's over by any stretch. Obviously, Caitlin Clark is the favorite, and that's who everyone thought would be the favorite. But the way that Angel Reese and Cameron Brink have been playing at least makes you pause and stop to think, is there a chance? Could they do it? So where are you at with Rookie of the Year? Is it just Caitlin, or does one of them have a shot?
So I was talking on Action Network. We did kind of a faux all-star roster last week to kind of talk through, it's like a fun topic, voting open, blah, blah, blah. And my little hot take at the end was my last all-star I picked was Angel Reese and not Caitlin Clark. And that is not to say, I'm not trying to say that in the long run, Angel's gonna have the better career. I still think the ceiling for Caitlin's a lot higher, but man, have I been impressed with Angel Reese. So she's now, and especially of late, so she's on 6 straight double-doubles right now. She's averaging basically 14 and 12 during that stretch, but for the season as a whole, she's averaging about 12 and 10. She's leading the league in offensive rebounds per game. Her offensive rebound rate is like historically good, like top 10 all time. She's 5th in total rebounds per game. She's 6th in steals per game. So this isn't just like a one-trick pony who really, we can talk about how her offensive rebounds sometimes are inflated because she's missing the shot and then just getting her own rebound. But to the other side of that, a lot of people hold against her inefficiency, but she just gets the rebound. So like those two kind of, they each lessen each other a little bit. But the overall point here is I've been incredibly impressed with Angel Reese. I referenced win shares earlier, not being a perfect stat by any stretch of the imagination, but being a useful stat when put in context. Angel Reese is at 1.2 win shares, easily leading the rookie class right now. Caitlin's actually negative. She's at negative 0.1. A lot of that is her high turnover rate. She hasn't been shooting the ball as efficiently as we've seen in the past when she was in college, and that shot maybe was a little easier to get up. I think by the end of the season, those two numbers will look pretty even. But as of this second, I would give it to Angel, and I actually think Aaliyah Edwards is one who needs a little bit of a shout here. I think she's having a really really good rookie season, and also has a case to be like in this conversation. Washington's going to be giving her minutes. It looks like they're fine, kind of rolling things up this year and kind of just letting the young kids play and seeing what they got. It's definitely a conversation. I think if the season ended this second, I think Caitlin would really be, potentially in trouble for the voting. But I do think they had that incredibly hard schedule to start season, both in terms of who they played and how tightly condensed those games were. I think now that spreads out and they get to play some easier competition, I think Caitlin's numbers are going to take off. I think by the end of the year, she will be the deserving recipient of this award. But if it was right now, I mean, we've joked about how these conversations, Angel and Caitlin, they draw headlines like no other. I think it would be a really interesting conversation if the season ended today, who should get that award and how voting would go down, and be a million think pieces about it, to say the least.
Yeah, and a lot of very unwanted negativity, I'm sure, around all
Yeah,
of that, and a lot of racists in the comments, and we know how it goes. But I agree with you. When you look at Angel Reese's offensive rebound numbers, they're historic. They're among the best ever. Karina and I talked about this last week. For anyone, not for rookies, for anyone.
yeah,
And what she's doing, I think it brings so much value, like you said, regardless of what her field goal percentage is. That is significant offensive value. And people think of offensive value as being like the pretty stuff, the stuff that Caitlin does, the deep threes, the cool passes. But sometimes the stuff that's just down in the trenches brings a lot of offensive value too. And that's what Angel Reese is doing. So I love it. I do think Cameron Brink is worth a shout out for being tied with Asia right now, by the way, in blocks per game,
that
second
is
in the league
wild.
at two and a
In
half
way fewer minutes.
in way fewer minutes as a rookie. Yeah, Cameron Brink is averaging 23 minutes per game and still tied for second in blocks at two and a
But
half.
also Camila Cardoso, and we haven't seen a ton of games of her, but I've been incredibly impressed. She's hit the ground running for Chicago as well. And I was a little bit skeptical when they drafted Angel and Camila, and thinking how that duo would work. Yeah, that was wrong. It works well, and it's really sad to see Elizabeth Williams out for the season. But what it's done is allow Teresa Weatherspoon and the Sky to kind of set up this front court of the future and see how it works together. And the immediate results say very, very well. And the future for this guy is super bright, not in small part because of those two on the interior.
Yes, definitely. I think Cardoso would be another one who we would maybe be talking about in this conversation if she had not missed so much time. And she's only started 4 games now. So obviously she's kind of playing catch up to these other three. But I think this just goes to show how much talent there is in this league and how bright the future is. And also, when you talk about outside of Caitlin, I'm repeating myself from last week's pod too, but bigs, how many bigs there are who are translating some of their skills at least right away, defensively,
Yeah.
rebounding, things like that. Whereas, like you said, Caitlin has the highest ceiling, but it's going to take her some more time. So, this is a very interesting one. This is another one where I think that, like you said, because the Fever schedule has been lightening up a little bit, they played that extremely tough schedule the first few weeks, and obviously they've already picked up a few wins since then. They've already been looking a little bit better. That maybe Caitlin ends up coming on late and kind of putting some distance between herself and the others after she kind of gets her feet under her a little bit more, and she just had such a tough welcome to the league. I think playing the Sun right away, 10 turnovers in that game, and then the schedule didn't let up from there. So we'll see. It's probably still going to be Caitlin, but definitely going to be a very, very good all rookie team this year, and one that's going to be worth talking about. And we're going to be looking back on for a long time, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Their impact on the court and off the court. It's definitely going
and
to be
off
the
the
type of
court.
class that gets referenced 50, 100 years from now as like, really a class that, and personality wise, it's such a, there's just so much in that class. And it's fun to be able to be seeing it with our eyes in front of us right now, kind of play out in the league.
No question. Off the court as well. This class has changed the game, and they're going to continue to change the game on and off the court. So fun to watch. All right, let's go ahead and get into defensive player of the year that we've been dangling to you guys for just a little bit here. All right. Defensive player of the year. I think there's some good candidates in this one as well. We've mentioned a lot of them already because, like last year, I think some of the MVP candidates are also defensive player of the year
Yep.
candidates because that's what makes you the most valuable player is if you are valuable on both ends. So we mentioned Asia and her numbers and her impact on defense. You mentioned Nafisa Collier. I think Alyssa Thomas is always in this conversation. And I think part of it too is defense is such a team thing more than offense that you almost have to look at how good a team's defense is when you talk about this. And the Sun have been the best defense. You could make an argument for the Lynx maybe, but definitely those two have been at the top in terms of team defense this year. And then Ezzy Magbagor, someone who I think that I wanted to kind of throw her name in there as well as the one player who is averaging more blocks per game than Cameron Brink or Asia Wilson this year, and someone who I have really, really enjoyed watching develop over the last few years. One of my favorite players in the league. So there might be some other candidates as well. Among those, Jim, I know you kind of hinted at it already. Who would you have as your front runner at this point in time?
Honestly, for me, this was one of the awards that if it's like stop the season this second was one of the biggest blowouts for me because I actually will push back a little bit on the Asia. Like I trust me, I love Asia. We covered that in deep in we went deep in that on the MVP. I think her defensive player of the year case is actually not that strong. The Aces have the 10th best or the third worst defensive rating this season, and that's not entirely on her, but I think it's really hard to make a defensive player of the year case when your team is struggling that much on that end. Now she's carrying so much on the offensive end. This not at all to, put down Asia, but instead to say, you referenced the Minnesota Lynx tied for the best defensive rating. Nafisa Collier, yeah, I did mention it up top that her ability to get rebounds, and it's not just the rebounds though. She's averaging 2.5 steals, 1.5 blocks. Again, working on a size deficit often because she's playing next to Alana Smith, who's an undersized center. She's really having to clean the glass like a center for this team, despite being several inches smaller and much shorter and much smaller than a lot of the players that she's going to be going against for those rebounds. I've just been so impressed with the flexibility that their whole defensive scheme takes on because of how good she has been defensively all season. Again, to spoil another thing, that the coaching side of it has been very impressive for Minnesota as well. But the coaching only does so much. Is the players got to do this stuff, and Nafisa Collier has been just absolutely incredible defensively. I actually think that if we're thinking about first team all defensive candidates, I think two of her teammates really deserve some love as well, who are kind of always overlooked in this. Alana Smith I mentioned already, but Courtney Williams has been outstanding defensively this season. I really think she gets overlooked on that side of things, and she has been absolutely essential to how good this Minnesota Lynx defense has been. So you've got like three candidates just from that one team, but to me, it's Nafisa Collier with a bullet for defensive player of the year so far, at least.
Yeah, I do think it's a little bit closer than probably you have it, but I would agree with everything you said on Afisa and the Lynx defense. So that's kind of what I was getting at, setting this up with the team defense thing is that's what's really hurting Asia is even more so than MVP, I think. And we talk about
Yeah.
her team's place in the standings for MVP, but her team's spot in the rankings for defensive rating is even lower. And part of that is that they've run up against a lot of teams' hot shooting nights. So the Mercury have gotten them a few times. So I do think that'll improve as well. But like you said, right now, 10th place in defensive rating in the league. It's really hard to have a defensive player of the year come from a team like that. So we're talking about right now. We're not talking about the end of the season. Right now, the Lynx and the Sun are the two best defenders. Or the two best defenses. To me, I do think is a little bit closer than you do between Alyssa Thomas and Nafisa Collier, because I think everything that you say about the Lynx defense and their versatility on
That's
defense
true.
and how impactful she is to that, I think you could say that about Alyssa Thomas on Connecticut as well and what she's able to do guarding all five positions and obviously rebounding at an incredibly high rate like Nafisa Collier, maybe a little bit below her in terms of that average, but also they play on a wildly slow paced team, does Connecticut. So all of those counting stats that you see from Alyssa Thomas would be even higher if they played at
Yeah,
pace
that's a
such as
great
the
point.
Aces. So I think Alyssa Thomas has an argument as well. Uh, Nafisa, going back to your point, when you look at the defensive rating for the Lynx the last 3 years, 2022, 10th in the league, 2023, 10th in the league, 2024, first in the league right now. they were allowing more than a point per possession in each of those last 2 years. Now they're under 0.9 points per
Wow.
possession. It's a Grand Canyon in between where their defense was the last 2 years and where it is this year. And Nafisa Collier is a big part of that. So
And against
I'm
such a tough schedule, they've played such a hard schedule, and the Sun, they may well pass those tests when they get to them, but Sun definitely haven't played the schedule that Fee and the Lynx have so far, and I think that I think I was weighting that a lot when I was thinking about this. It probably is tighter because you wouldn't weight it too much because we're at a certain break in the season, so it'll be really interesting to see. I think probably the Lynx have a little bit of shooting luck regression that's coming for them, whereas the Sun have a little bit of schedule regression, and it likely will be a really fun race watching those two down the stretch for Depoy.
The schedule is a great point. Yeah, and it's probably one of the biggest thing it's separating Nafisa at the moment. But I do think this is another fun race, and just from a personal standpoint, like an aesthetic standpoint, I know a lot of people just want to watch offense and want to watch points and all that. I love watching both of these players play defense. All of these players,
Yeah.
not just these two. But it's art to me when you watch one of these players switch on to someone else and completely shut them down when they're giving up 5 inches, or when you watch AT who maybe do the opposite when she's given up 5 inches and still has the strength to just hang with someone down low. It's art.
Do you have a
So
favorite defender to watch in the league?
it would actually be Ezzy. That's why I
Oh,
threw
that
her
was
in
my
there.
answer too. That was mine
Is
too.
it? I love it. I
Yeah.
know Ezzy is not actually in the conversation with these other three at the moment, but she's close enough, and I just love watching her enough that I
She
had
was
to throw
third
her
for
in.
me, so she's in the
Okay.
conversation for me. And I'll
Okay.
say we could even soft tease. There's a player who's probably my second favorite to watch, who's in the MIP conversation.
Oh, well, that's a great segue. Let's move on to MIP then, because that's next on our list anyway. So this one, I'm going to throw out some names that I think are sort of in the conversation here. And on this podcast with Karina a few weeks ago, I was saying how it's Dejanay, and at that time, it was so clearly Dejanay. It was only 2 weeks into the season, but I was fully beating the drum for Dejanay Carrington, and I still think she's very much on this list. But from what we've seen the last few weeks, I do think there's some other players that have sort of inserted their names into this conversation, and Dearica Hamby is one of them. Maddie Siegrist is one of them, and we're recording this Monday afternoon. So by the time you're listening to this, you will have seen Maddie Siegrist's first official game as a go-to option because Arike
Yeah.
Agubawale is out for that game against the Lynx on Monday night. We'll also see her go up against potentially the defensive player of the year, Nafisa Collier. So huge, huge test for Maddie tonight. Can't wait to see how that goes. But I also think I don't think any of these players is going to win it, but I just want to throw out some players who I think deserve some recognition for improving a lot. And usually the most improved player is not a player who was already extremely, extremely good. But what we talked about with Asia,
Yeah.
somehow, miraculously, she was the best player of the league and got better. You're
Yeah.
not supposed to continue to get better when you're already better than everyone else, but she has. Jackie Young, I think, does that every year as well. And if you look at Jackie Young's healthy games where she wasn't dealing with that illness, I think she has continued to get better. Ezzy Magbagor, who we just talked about, has continued to get better. And obviously, she was an all-star last year already, and she hasn't gotten enough better that I think she's actually going to win this, but she has gotten better. Kalia Copper, part of that is the offense that she's playing in now and her team environment, but she obviously has put up some better numbers as well. But I think really for me, it does come down to more of the type of player in that first group that we talked about who is having a sort of breakout season. So do you have one of those players as a front runner right now, or is there someone I didn't mention that you have as a front runner? Because this one feels a lot more wide open to me.
This one is definitely the most wide open. I'll say that Dejanay was the second player that I really is probably my second favorite player to watch on defense. Absolutely love watching her. Huge fan of her in general. But what I think it's so funny about this award is like it really does. Like if you want it to be, it can be the silliest but most fun to discuss, right? Because a lot of the names you throw out, I was looking for all these players. Like I looked at Dejanay, I looked at Maddie Seagrass, even to a more extreme degree. I looked at Ty Harris, I looked at Natasha Mack. A lot of the times it really is just getting more minutes. Like Dejanay's points are actually down on a per 36 basis. So there really aren't that many players who that jumped out to me, which tells me this is totally open. And I think your point on Asia is actually there's no way she's going to win it. We'll preface it with that. But like to make the improvement from the best player in the league to the incredibly best player in the league, like that's actually more impressive, I think, than a lot of just getting more minutes and getting more usage because you're on the court more often. Like it really is impressive. And I think it could be a really fun, like hipster take to have Asia Wilson as your winner for most improved player of the year. By the end of the year, my guess is someone will have really popped and we will see someone who, is either handling a bigger minutes load and scoring more in those like at a permanent basis, or someone whose shooting has really improved, or defensively. What one player who I do want to shout out, and also could even get a shout out in the next award we have here, but Jordan Horston has really improved her game from being a kind of a net negative in her rookie year, which is understandable. This is an incredibly difficult league to break into. She's been very valuable off the bench for Seattle and really been an impressive part of that team for me. So to me, that's like the type of player that I'm going to look at. She's never going to win this award because on the surface, the stats are basically the exact same. But I like approaching it that way of looking at, who's really making the improvement, not just getting more minutes on the court. And I do think Asia Wilson has a really good case. And Jackie Young for sure. That first section of the season before she got a little bit sick there, that she really was jumping out to me as someone who actually could win this award despite the level of play that she was coming in the season at, because we were seeing it so noticeably in her playmaking and her scoring off the dribble that that's the type of thing where maybe it can actually build a case. Whereas Asia, I think, would probably just be a hipster one-off bet that you could write a fun column on.
Yeah, the tough thing with Jackie is that part of the big improvement that we saw was in this distributing, which of course is going to be less noticeable when Chelsea Gray comes back. But she did such an admirable job and has continued to do so, filling in at point guard for her, which I think is why you could put her on this list. I feel like Jackie Young could have been on this list like the last 3 straight seasons or something like that. You go back to 2 seasons ago when she improved her shot a bunch over the offseason when they brought in Becky Hammond and Tyler Marsh on the coaching staff, and she could have been in the conversation then just from the way her shot improved. But I want to go back to your point about the minutes thing, because I agree, and not just in the WNBA, in any professional, college, whatever, at any level, when you talk about most improved players, it is often just the player that wasn't getting minutes and now they are. And so I also try to keep that in mind. But one thing I also try to keep in mind is that if you're able to basically maintain your production efficiency wise on a much higher volume and load and usage, you probably did improve. Even if your actual efficiency numbers didn't improve. In general, if you are seeing a much bigger load and you're not actually any better as a player, you're probably going to drop in efficiency. So if you can do that without dropping, that is still something that I think I would read into. And I think Maddie Siegrist is someone who I want to point out as someone who sort of fits that bill. Last year, 8 minutes a game. This year, 34 minutes a game. Obviously, without Satu Sabli and without Natasha Howard, even before the Aurike injury, she was thrust into the starting lineup and has been seeing heavy minutes and a lot higher load in terms of offensively and in the shots that she's taking. And her efficiency numbers are basically the same still as they were in 8 minutes a game last year.
Incredibly efficient. She's a scary efficient player.
True shooting percentage is 68%, 68% last year and this year. 58%, excuse me. I did my math wrong here.
I was like, man, was it that good?
Yeah, I realized when I said that number that like no one is ever 68%, and that was wrong. Her hoop stats has points per scoring attempt and not actually true shooting percentage. And so I have that pulled up, and points per scoring attempt is just true shooting percentage times 2. So I was dividing by 2 in my head and I did the math wrong. 58%, but it was 58% last year as well. It was 1.17 points per scoring attempt last year, 1.16 this year. Points per play, which includes turnovers in there, 1.09 and 1.09. Effective field goal percentage, which is field goal percentage, but threes count a little extra, as they should. 53% last year, 56% this year. So her efficiency has not dropped off. It's basically stayed the same, despite her load going from practically nothing to really second on the team. And tonight it's going to be first on the team in terms of load that she's carrying. So I do think that on the surface, she might look like someone who just is getting a lot more minutes now. But I do think that she has improved a lot as a player and someone who probably should be in this conversation.
Yeah, keeping
But
your efficiency from becoming she was basically benchman, like at the end of the game, blowout minutes to then being a number one option tonight against the number one defense. I am really excited to watch how she handles that tonight, because that's an incredibly tall task to ask for someone, any player, let alone a second year player who's coming off a rookie season in which they average 8 minutes a game. So definitely agree with you on that.
well, that's a good point too on the end of blowouts thing, because those 8 minutes a game were also against easier defenders, because a lot
Yep.
of them were at the end of blowouts against the other team's bench, and now she's facing minutes against some of the best defenders in the league, like we're going to see tonight against Nafisa. And turnover rate here, just to put a bow on it, has actually improved from last year as well by a full
Wow.
percentage point. So Maddie, definitely someone who I am very excited to finally see kind of get her shine and get her opportunity, because someone who I've been high on for a while, and someone who I think fits the bill beyond just the minutes thing. But there are a lot of good candidates for this one. We didn't talk enough about De'Erica Hamby. I don't think. I want to move on, but De'Erica Hamby deserves a shout out too,
Yeah.
as coming back from that pregnancy, and then obviously it took her a year to really get to this point, but where she's at now is just one of the best players in the league, flat out one of the best players in the league.
Well,
And
we might have one more award where we get to shout her out. You used the key word in that sentence that might be coming back around in our final award.
yep, we'll get to that definitely. But that's another one we're gonna dangle, because we have three more awards: sixth player of the year, coach of the year, and comeback player of the year. So let's get to sixth player of the year. This one, I don't know what you think. To me, this is the one where I think is currently the biggest gap. Probably as big as you think defensive player of the year is how big the gap that I think on this one is. But I know you have some other players you want to shout out. I think Kennedy Carter is running away with this thing right now, and what she's doing. There's actually some numbers that you could pull on her that are pretty historic as well, in terms of her scoring per 40, her assists per 40 off the bench. There are very, very, very few players in this league that have ever put up numbers at the rate that she's putting them up off the bench. And you could argue that maybe she shouldn't be coming off the bench, but she is. So she's eligible for this award. And it's so noticeable when you watch the Sky, too, numbers aside, that sometimes their offense is struggling. They're in a funk. They're not really able to put the ball in the hoop. Then they bring in Kennedy Carter and they go on like an 8-0 run in the next like minute and a half. And that's not a coincidence. So she's my favorite. Is she your favorite? Is there anyone else that is threatening her right now?
She's definitely my favorite this time of year. She's at this point in the season, she's just one of the best downhill players. She's so fun to watch too. Really, like one of the most talented offensive players, like you said. It's really fun to see her like finding a groove and a team that really kind of appreciates her, and has in Teaspoon a coach that really seems to have figured out the way best to use her. But I will say she started this most recent game over the weekend against the Fever, and I'm wondering if she's going to be in the starting lineup, which means by end of season we might not be able to have her for this award anymore. So there were a couple other names that jumped out to me. I think the funniest universe is one in which Kennedy Carter and Sophie Cunningham are the top two for an award, because they're like the two villains to two very different groups of people. So having the two of them as the two leading candidates for sixth player of the year, which is what my ballot would look like right now, very funny. I did also shout out Jordan Horston above. Again, she's never going to have kind of the numbers for this, but she's done so incredibly, a really, really efficient job for the Storm. And then the only other name that I had here is another player who I think maybe a little hot take here for you. I'll say the player's name first and then the take. But Kayla Thornton, if you see what Kayla Thornton has been doing with the other four starters of the Liberty, I think that there is a very strong possibility. Maybe it won't happen during the regular season. We're seeing it in some of the games where Sloot is out right now. But if they need to in the postseason, I would not be surprised if Kayla Thornton ends up taking the fifth role from Courtney Vandersloot. Sloot moves to the bench. Sabrina's done a great job in the playmaking role. And the unit with Kayla Thornton out there really kind of covers up some of the deficiencies we saw in the finals for the Liberty last year. Kayla Thornton is just awesome. If anyone doesn't watch enough Liberty games, make sure you focus when she comes in the game. Just one of the best all-around players, like pure 3-and-D, just so efficient, so good. Definitely a key part of that team for this year and what their ceiling looks like. And right now she's been doing a lot of that from the bench. So I think another one who's probably not going to get the points per game that this award usually relies on, but someone who really should be in the conversation if we're actually talking about impact to winning off of the bench.
Yeah, I actually don't consider that a hot take at all because I don't know if you saw it in the notes here. I actually put that as my last bullet as well.
Oh,
Um,
really? Oh, that's awesome.
I put KT if Sloot is back and starts question mark because if Sloot is back and if Sloot starts are not the same question
Yep.
like you mentioned. So we'll see what that happens because again, you gotta. I believe it's more than half or maybe half or more of your games you have to come off the bench. And so that'll kind of depend on what Sandy does when Salute comes back. But you mentioned the points per game. Yeah, ultimately, I don't think Kayla Thornton is going to win this award, whether she deserves it or not, because I think voters often
Yeah.
look at stats and stats only, and I don't think she is going to be putting up the counting stats that some of the other players are. A lot of what Kayla Thornton does on a basketball court does not show up in the box score, and that's
Yeah.
why I think you just told everyone to go watch her because you really have to watch her. You have to watch the Liberty. It might show up in the on-off stats if you want to
Yeah.
go
No, it
look at
definitely
that.
does.
But I don't know if voters are looking at that. Some are, I'm sure. I would like for more voters to look at more things like that. But realistically, I think a lot of them look at points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks per game, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
not sure if she's going to get this award. I do think she deserves a shout out. A couple others that I wanted to bring up, just that I don't think would be in the conversation right now. In fact, they for sure would not be. But if someone were to potentially make kind of a late push in like August or September to challenge for this award, who I think that might be is Temi Fagbenle, who
Yeah.
was phenomenal off the bench for the first few weeks for the Fever, and then actually got inserted into the starting lineup over Alyssa Smith, and then got hurt. So she's another one. When she comes back, will they start her or not? If they don't start her and she continues to produce at the level she was, she might have a case.
If they do start her, then Alyssa's probably going to have like the old school case of getting a lot of points
Yes,
off the bench. So either way, there could be a Fever player in the sixth player of the year race.
that's a good point for sure. And Tip Hayes is one who I wanted to mention on the Aces, and then also Chelsea Gray, who has been active the last 2 games but has not played. When she comes back, I'm not throwing her in the mix, but when she comes back, if Alicia Clark goes to the bench,
Yeah.
would Alicia Clark potentially have a possibility? But that's got to happen soon because Alicia Clark's been doing nothing but starting, so she's going to have to come off the bench for most of the rest of the season in order to even be eligible. So I don't think either of those 2 players are probably going to be in the mix by the end, but they might be. I think it's possible. So this awards is not signed, sealed, and delivered yet. Kennedy would be my front runner, but like you said, if she starts the rest of the season, she will be out of the mix for this league or for this award. So we'll see a lot of interesting ones on this one. I do want to move on to the last couple here. Coach of the year. This is a fun one because I think there are a few really, really, really strong candidates. And I have Cheryl Reeve, who we talked about as being right towards the top of the list. I have Girl Dad from Phoenix Mercury being right towards the top of the list. And I know there's a thing as voter fatigue. I don't know if it applies as much for coach of the year as maybe for MVP, but Steph White, who is the reigning coach of the year, I do still think having her team have only one loss to the Liberty at this point in the season and what she's been able to do developing Ty Harris and Dejanay Carrington to just take over in the starting backcourt for their starting backcourt who they lost over the offseason, I think has been really impressive. You could potentially make an argument for Sandy Brondello. I think I'd probably have her below that tier of those other 3. But is there anyone else you wanted to throw in the mix? And do you have your front runner as any one of those, or is it really too tight to call?
I have Cheryl Reeve as a pretty heavy favorite right now. I think, not just that the team is winning, but these awards often go based off of where preseason expectations were. Shout Danny Barlavi, who was all over the links preseason, being proven right to the nth degree. This is a team that was really not. They were seen as a maybe fringe playoff team, but really, I think if you look at by some of the projections coming in, they were like the ninth or 10th team in the W by projected wins. They look like a top 2-3 team right now, if not the best team in the W based on like the actual output of their success so far. And now you can talk about they definitely had some shooting luck, and that might be due for a little regression, maybe even on both ends, offensively and defensively. But to date, the stuff they have done is so impressive. The resume speaks for itself. And I think it's so cool that Cheryl is kind of what I referenced this, the defense with the 5 out and really being able to rely on Alana Smith at the rim, like as a rim protector, and Nafisa Collier cleaning the glass, like two players who maybe a lot of people would say, I don't know if that's going to work with Alana Smith as your 5 and Nafisa Collier as your 4. It has worked so well. I think it's really a credit to Cheryl. So she's my number 1 by far. I did have Girl Dad on my list, but I actually had Teresa Weatherspoon as my second right now. I know the wins maybe aren't there that are needed for an award like this, but the Sky actually have been better than I thought they would be. They're in every game basically. They've even won more than I would have guessed at this point. And I think even more than that, I've just been very impressed with the cohesion of the team, being able to bring in Kenny Carter, who has bounced around a lot for whatever reasons, but she's sticking now and she's playing the best basketball of her career. Angel Reese and Camila Cardosa talked about how I had questions on how that would fit. That has been an awesome fit. So I think Teresa Weatherspoon in her first season, I mean, if I were a Chicago Sky fan, the future couldn't be brighter. And she strikes me as the type of coach who's going to be there for a really long time, have a lot of success. And we're kind of just seeing the start of it right now. So maybe she'll get this award. Maybe it's next year that they take the leap from like a 12-win team to like a 22-win team, or maybe it's even in 2 years or something. But I think the future is really bright, and I think she's doing an awesome job, and definitely is one who deserves to be in this discussion for what she has done with the Sky team so far this season.
I definitely would have had Spoon right up at the top of that list. I think a couple weeks ago, they have taken a couple losses to the Fever and to the Mystics at the bottom of the standings. But
Yeah.
obviously, like you said, you can look past the wins and losses and looked at what she's done, just bringing a lot of these different players together and getting them to compete. And with the youth that they have on that team, I think you and I talk about betting all the time. If we were to set odds on 2025 Coach of the Year compared to 2024 Coach of the Year, I would have Teaspoon a lot higher for 2025 Coach of the Year, like you said, because that might be the year. I do still think they probably are going to end up being a lottery team this year. They might sneak into that 7 or 8 spot, but you give them another lottery pick, give them another year for these
Watch
current
out.
rookies and some of that youth to develop. Exactly. Next year, they could take a huge leap, and that could put her right in the mix for Coach of the Year. So I love what she's done. It might be a year too early on it, but they could make a run late. And if they get into the playoffs, I would have to reconsider. I'd have to seriously think about her if they do find a way to get into the playoffs. Because I thought there was no shot, like you did,
Same.
no shot that they made the playoffs. I thought the 9 seed, I wasn't sure, but coming in to the season, 10, 11, 12 in some order, Mystics, Sky, Sparks, thought there was no shot. And Mystics and Sparks still don't feel like they really have a shot. Sky, they might. So I like that one. I do think it's Cheryl Reeve at the top, though. I love what Girl Dad has done with that offense. I think that's been why
Yeah.
that's why I would have him as a potential candidate there. And just the fact that we have only gotten a glimpse so far the first week of what he's been able to do now with BG and Beck and the full healthy complement of players.
Yeah, they're looking real good. That's the one who I think has the most room to kind of shoot up these rankings and kind of potentially really be, 1 and 1A with Cheryl. If they play this well for an extended stretch of time, with what we've seen from, with their full roster now hitting, I think this team's going to be, it might be that we have 5 serious contenders this year, and Phoenix is that 5th contender, and he deserves a lot of credit if that is the case indeed.
Agreed. It's such a fun brand of basketball to watch as well. So we have one more award we want to talk about, and I will preface this one, Comeback Player of the Year, by saying I think that we need to implement an all comeback player team, because some of these you have a team, you have an all rookie team, you
Love
have an all
that.
defensive team. So all the names that we've said who aren't going to win the award are still going to be on the all whatever team. We don't have an all comeback player of the year team, but we need one this year because there are so many good candidates, and most of the names that we're about to talk about are not going to win this award and may be deserving in a lot of years. So pitch to anyone from the league. Maybe we can implement that going forward. I would be fully on board. But a lot of these players who I'm going to name off here were either out of the league all of last year, part of last year, for a lot of different reasons. And
Yeah.
they have so many just incredible stories that vary greatly between one and the other, but all of them are hooping and have had to work incredibly hard to get to this point. So Bree Jones, of course, did play a little bit last year, but got hurt about this time in the season, about a month in last year, missed the rest of the year. She is back playing excellent basketball. Skylar Diggins-Smith, obviously with the pregnancy, and she has come back and done amazing things for the Storm. Tina Charles was out of the league and now is a key piece on the Atlanta Dream. Diamond DeShields, who maybe is still kind of dealing with some stuff in basketball wise, probably is not at the same point on the court as some of those others, but at the same time, what she went through is even tougher than probably a lot of what those others
Yeah.
went through. No disrespect to, the injury or the pregnancy or anything. Obviously, I have no idea how tough that was, but Diamond had to teach herself how to walk again.
Yeah.
That's
That's crazy.
scary. That's really
Yeah.
scary. So for her to be on a basketball court at all is an amazing story. And then I did want to throw in Kennedy Carter into this one as well. Obviously, different reasons than any of those why she was out of the league, but now she's back, and we've talked about how well she's playing. Are there any other names? I feel like there's probably some names I'm forgetting because there's been so many good ones. But are there any others I'm forgetting, and who would you have at the top?
Did you say Hamby?
I did not. Well, so here's my thing with Dearica Hamby is that I don't know, would she count? Because she did play all of last year.
Yeah. It's just like
But
a comeback. It's more like it maybe improved is the better case. It's so
it's tough
like you said, you
because
almost could have a comeback player like your team and each one have a different reason. They could be like coming back from X, coming back from Y, coming back from Z, coming back from
exactly.
Alpha and Beta. Like you really could fill 5 different slots. This award is going to be crazy this year with all the different adversity that these players are overcoming. That it's just one story after the next, all different and all unique and all impressive in different ways. It's like you said, it really is a fun award this year.
It is, and I'm glad you brought up Hamby because she definitely deserves a lot of credit and it is kind of a comeback, obviously. I mean, it's not kind of, it is a comeback. The kind of only applies to whether it counts as like a comeback player of the year in quotes in 2024 because most of these players didn't play in 2023. Bree Jones did, but only played for a month. Dearica Hamby played the whole season, but she obviously was still working back from her pregnancy. So it is still a comeback. And so maybe she should be under consideration for this award. I got to think about that one. I'm interested what the voters would think. But like you said, there's so many good ones. And we need a comeback team. I don't even know how to pick one of these, to be honest. This is easily the hardest award on the list
I
to pick.
agree.
You don't have anyone either? I don't even want to force it. I don't even want to
I
try.
was honestly going to defer to you, so I guess we're both just punting the ball back and forth. I guess if pinned down, I don't know. Who would you go with?
Such a good question. I, I hate myself for even having to pick one of these, but in the interest of not copping out
Mm.
and of actually making a selection, I think I will go with Skylar Diggins-Smith.
Okay, I'll
Just
go Diamond. I'll go Diamond and
okay,
Shields, and
okay,
assume that she keeps working back throughout the season too. So
yes,
that'll be my
yes.
official answer.
Diamond obviously went through the scariest stuff. I do think what Skylar went through, not just pregnancy, but when you can read up the articles about kind of having to get her body back and
Yeah,
all the weight that she lost. So that was honestly pretty scary too. And for her to do that at age 33, 34 has to be a lot tougher than someone, again, not this is like not any disrespect, but like Nafisa Collier coming back from pregnancy at age 24.
it's just
Also
different
wildly
experiences.
impressive.
Yeah,
Also something that I as a man cannot possibly fathom. I would probably be out for like the rest of my life if I were pregnant for 2 weeks and these women are pregnant for 9 months and somehow play basketball again. And Nafisa was able to do it in time to play with Sylvia Fowles for a couple weeks at the end of
yeah.
that year. So an incredible, incredible story that I'm not trying to diminish, but I think what Skylar has done has been remarkable. And she's playing at an extremely high level for the Storm. It's not like she just came back and got on a basketball court. She's playing at a really high level. So I would have to go with her, but I don't really want to pick. I'm actually glad I'm not a voter because there's so many good stories on this list. I
Yeah,
think they
for
all
sure.
deserve it. And I couldn't argue with your pick of Diamond to Shields either. Do you have any other thoughts before we wrap up on just any last thoughts on any of these awards or on just kind of anything in the league as a whole?
No, I think it was really fun because I think that it's easy. You're watching the games night to night. You kind of your eyes are telling you stuff, and you're looking stuff here and there. But I think what I had the most fun diving into was just how amazing Asia's start to the season has been. I knew it was outstanding, but I think the 6-6 of the aces ness kind of like bleeds into your head, and you kind of like, all right, yeah, they're struggling. I do think she's genuinely playing even better than last year when she genuinely was the best player in the league, and so it just kind of stood out to me. Some of the numbers she is tracking for are just truly, truly, truly historic, and the more seasons that get put together like this, the more conversations that get to be had about where she ranks historically. Even in a season where her team's 500, she's doing things that are kind of breaking my brain, which is the sign of like a potential GOAT. So I thought that was just so fun to really dive into that and see just how impressive she has been this season. And I think it's easy right now to say, bring it back to betting one more time. I said the Liberty became the favorites to win the title right now. And listen, I was on the Liberty last year, and I thought that they potentially could win. If I'm looking at that and I'm Asia Wilson right now, I'm like, all right, I'm licking those chops because I'm still the best player in this league. I think now by a decent margin. And if they can just get the pieces to settle in, if they get fully healthy, it could be on repeat where no team loves to kind of use that disrespect. Maybe the Sun with the disrespect with the CT, but the Aces, we know they love to kind of look for those headlines and really kind of use that to motivate. That this might be exactly what they need, and Asia's just playing at a different level right now.
Asia has an incredible ability, I think, to take slights and turn them into
Yeah,
production on the court. And that fourth
it
place
is
vote,
amazing.
I have no
Oh
doubt
man.
that whoever voted for her fourth place is fueling this historic season that we have right now. So it's been so fun to watch. And Asia, as you call the potential GOAT, or as our friend Owen Pence likes to say, the GOAT in training, I think is
Love
spot
that.
on and probably a great place to wrap this pod up. So Jim, thank you so much for joining me. Where can everyone follow you? I know it's on the screen, but for our non-YouTube people.
For sure. So I'm on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Turvey Bets. It's Turvey. And then in the Action app, same deal. And obviously the Bet She Wins podcast. It's you, me, friend Danny Barlavi, and our friend Mary Liebig. So if you're not listening to that, definitely check that out as well. So find me on all the socials, and then you'll find stuff of mine from there.
Love it. And I'm at cwetzel31. You can also follow at herhoopstats. Go subscribe and like and all that stuff. Jim, once again, thank you for joining me. Thanks for everyone listening, tuning in. Have a great week, and we will be back with more Coast to Coast next week.